Today, on the Word Preacher Podcast, an unexpected reunion, revealing the secret and a final blessing from Israel. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher Podcast. All right, our Come Follow Me for this coming week's curriculum will bring us to Genesis 42 through 50, the remainder of the book of Genesis. So let's get started with the unexpected reunion. Of course, previously we talked about how Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dream and prepared Egypt to feed the entire region when a 7-year famine struck unexpectedly by preserving a fifth of all that was produced during the 7 years of plenty that preceded it. Now this famine struck Canaan as well, and Jacob sent out 10 of his sons to Egypt to purchase grain, but he kept Benjamin behind. He'd already lost Joseph, and he was determined not to lose his youngest son, Benjamin. So let's get started with some reading in Genesis 42, 6 through 9. And Joseph was governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan, to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. Now, Joseph did want to see what kind of men his brothers were. And so that's got to be part of the reason for the pretense that we read here in verses 6 through 9, that was, of Genesis 42. So they explain that they're not spies. They talk about their family, indicating they had a father who was still in Canaan. They were 12 sons of this man whose name was Jacob, and they had a younger brother who hadn't come with them, and another one that was gone. Joseph told them, still, in the guise of the stern dictator of Egypt, he told them that if they were honest, they would leave one of their brothers to be bound. And when they returned, they would bring the youngest brother with them. And that would be how he would know that they weren't just spies. So he takes Simeon and binds him. Now, this not only checks the character of his brothers who had sold him into slavery, but it also provides him with an opportunity in the future to see his youngest brother and to fulfill his own dream, which he had had when he was young, in which all of his brethren bowed before him. So, of course, this situation is a little worrisome to Joseph's other brothers. He says, or it reads, starting in verse 21, And they said one to another, We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child? And ye would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. So they're whispering amongst themselves about how they're kind of getting what they deserve for being so rotten to Joseph. That's got to be eye-opening for Joseph to know what was happening. So he keeps Simeon behind. The rest of them, they take the grain that they've purchased, but he secretly returns the money that they had exchanged, putting it in the sacks of each of his brothers. Now, of course, they go on their way, and they don't even realize that they have their money back until they arrive at an inn, and one of them opens up the sack to feed the animals and finds all their money. That's cause for concern. They were already accused of being spies. Now they've got a bunch of food that they haven't paid for, it looks like. This was not a good experience. This scared them. But, it was too late to do anything at that point. They went back and reported their situation to Jacob. Now, of course, Jacob is even more upset. He was distraught at the prospect of losing his youngest son. He did not want that to happen. He says, now you've lost Simeon as well. He was very unhappy. But as the famine continued, they knew they had to go down to Egypt. So Jacob is finally convinced to let his sons return, ensuring that they do some effort to try and make things nice. They brought the best fruit of the land, balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds, as well as doubled the money so that they wouldn't be accused of stealing. Well, when they arrive, Joseph invites them to dine with him in his house. They find this highly suspicious for someone who treated them kind of roughly before. Now he wants to invite them for dinner, and they suspect that he's planning to kill them. Well, eventually they come before him, and this is what it reads. And said, O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food, and it came to pass when we came to the inn that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And he said, Peace be to you, fear not, your God, and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. So, of course, very clever for Joseph to say that, which was true. He did have their money, and it was also true that their God, the God of their father Jacob, had restored their treasure to them. All right. Revealing the secret. So the time comes for them to depart. Joseph hides his own silver cup in the sack of his youngest brother Benjamin. He lets them go, and he sends his servants to overtake his brethren and accuse them of stealing. They're very defensive, saying, if any of us have stolen, let them be accountable. We did not steal. They're very confident none of them stole. This is how they respond. Let's do some reading. 9 through 17 in Genesis 44. With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. And he said, Now also let it be according unto your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. And they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched, and began at the eldest, and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, and laid at every man his ass, and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that ye have done? Wot ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father." Joseph insists that he keep Benjamin, and that the rest of them can return to their father. Judah humbles himself and pleads that he be taken in place of Benjamin. This is a dramatic change from the character with which he participated in the sale of Joseph to the Midianites those years before. The humility of Judah moved Joseph, and he commanded his other servants to leave the room. And Joseph said to his brethren, "I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, "Come near unto me, I pray you." And they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life." That's Genesis 45, 3 through 5. So Joseph explains the Lord set him up to rule in Egypt and to save the lives of his family. He told them to bring everyone else to Egypt, for there would be 5 more years of famine that remained. They returned to Jacob, who at first disbelieves that Joseph could be alive. He has had a lot of sorrow in his life. He felt like he worked hard and he prospered, but he felt like he was cheated out of a lot of things. And finally this news comes that his son is alive, and his spirit is revived, and he goes down to Egypt with the carriages that they've sent. And at last Jacob and his son are reunited, and they weep together in joy. Because of Joseph's preparation and management, Egypt was able to provide grain in exchange for great wealth. The people came from all over the region to buy from Egypt. And when they were out of money, he, still willing to magnify Egypt, do his job, he said, "Give us your flocks, your cattle." And they did that, and they got the food that they needed. And they were out of cattle, and they came back and said, "We don't have any money. We don't have any cattle. Please don't let us starve." And he said, "Why don't you give us your land? And you can still work the land, but you're going to give 1/5 of what you produce back to Egypt." And so, except for the priests' land, which belonged to them, Egypt is able to accumulate all of this wealth and land and cattle, and it's due to Joseph being able to accurately interpret the vision that came. Now, it's significant that of all the great nations in the old Bronze Age, including the Hittites, the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians, really only Egypt survived as a world power when that all came crashing down. And it came down over centuries. It wasn't like an overnight thing. Historians look at the arrival of the sea peoples and other natural disasters. And over a series of several centuries, the empires just fell apart. They stopped having large structures. They stopped being able to trade with one another. People kind of went back to a former age, and it was a smaller place. Even Egypt, though they had survived this as a world power on the Nile, they didn't have the influence that they had in the days when they waged war with the Hittites up, in the area that would be Canaan. They didn't have that kind of influence hundreds of years later when it was time for Moses to depart and be isolated from them. All of this is intentional. All of this was orchestrated by the Lord, of course. But it is interesting that things were set so that they could become a great people there in Israel. Now, of course, at the end of his life, Jacob was getting old and he wanted to bless his children. He first blesses Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph, blessing the younger Ephraim to be greater than the older, something that he personally knew something about, even though Joseph at first protested. It did happen as Jacob blessed them, with Ephraim being a vital tribe in the northern kingdom. He also blesses and makes statements about his other sons. He foretells kind of less benefit for Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And he mentions specific sins. Reuben having gone into one of his father's wives, Simeon and Levi having been violent with the men of Shechem. And then he gets to Judah. And even though Judah's not flawless, he's had some problems in helping, for example, his daughter-in-law to be married, ends up having children with her unexpectedly. He has a favorable blessing that's given to him. It's prophesied that he will be as a lion and that he would have the scepter until Shiloh came. Notable prophecy. Zebulun would have ships, Issachar would be hard workers, Dan would be as a serpent to strike at enemies, Gad would be a warring troop, Asher would have bread and prosperity, Naphtali would have good words and be quick, Benjamin would be as a wolf, devouring prey and dividing the spoil. And he gets to Joseph, who he describes as being a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over, and that the blessings of the everlasting hills from ancient times would be upon him, and bless him with prosperity and with progeny. These blessings are significant. Israel knew what he was doing. He was a man of God. And even though he had a lot of sorrow and he didn't see like that Joseph was going to survive, and he worried about Benjamin and had a lot of things he didn't know, when the Lord was with him, he predicted things that would happen centuries, even millennia before they did. Because God had called him, and he let God prevail in his life. This was the theme of Israel, and would become vital for the survival of the 12 tribes. In the end, the 12 tribes of Israel would be the framework through which the Lord would work with men for thousands of years. Even today, these covenants are still vital to the way that we understand the scriptures and understand the role that we have in serving one another and the Lord himself. Now, the tribes of Israel did not always do what was right, but when they humbled themselves, as Judah had done before his brother Joseph, they received truth and mercy. Truth and mercy for the humble and penitent. The difficulties that these tribes experienced lasted longer and unfolded in ways that none of them foresaw, but the Lord had provided a way all along. In the life of Joseph, we have a valuable lesson. Difficult circumstances are, even as it was in the days of Joseph, at their very worst, temporary. In the end, God knows what he was doing all along, and he will make it work out for those who love him. We appreciate all the support for the Word Preacher podcast. Next week, we'll be looking at Exodus 1 through 6, the start of the prophecy of Moses. Of course, there's a ton that we did not talk about in this week's reading. Please study that individually and with your family. And of course, as always, fight on.